So I appreciate everybody joining us here today for Lincoln at the Library, our first event for Lincoln at the Library here in 2024 with Daniel Weinberg. I'd like to tell you a little bit about his auspicious history and that of his bookshop before I turn it over to Dan. So Daniel Weinberg owns the 86-year-old Abraham Lincoln Bookshop in Chicago. Established in 1938, the bookshop serves the needs of collectors and scholars, professional historians, and independent writers, dedicated to first edition hunters and casual history enthusiasts. As suggested by the name, the bookshop specializes in Lincolniana, material related to the Civil War, and material related to U.S. presidents. Rare books, autographs, manuscripts, works of art, statuary, and other treasures grace his shelves and bookshop's walls. In-print books, pamphlets, historic broadsides, carte visite, and magnificent reproductions of Lincoln and Civil War photographs are available to those who share the love of history. Weinberg is on the board of both the Lincoln Forum and the Abraham Lincoln Association. He is an expert on Lincoln autographs and their forgeries. He served as past chair of the Midwest chapter of Antiquarian Booksellers Association of America and past president of the Chicago Civil War Roundtable. Finally, he was on the executive board of the lamented Lincoln College and chair of the Heritage Committee that established the Lincoln Heritage Museum in Lincoln, Illinois. Thank you, everybody. Let's turn it over to Dan.
All right. Thank you so much, Jesse, for that wonderful introduction, and welcome to fellow Lincoln obsessives, as Spielberg likes to call us. I'm honored, actually, to be having been asked to speak at the Lincoln Research Center named after Ian Rowland. He was a leader and a dynamo, passionate about Lincoln and his era. He was intellectually curious, and I'm better off to have known him, frankly. The bookshop, as Jesse indicated, started in 1930. I'm a 19th century guy. In 1936, Lincoln was in the air because Carl Sandburg had just come out with his war years and had become a good friend of Ralph Newman, who had a shop called Home of Books. And Sandburg suggested to Ralph, why don't you specialize in Lincoln and the Civil War era? And he decided to do that. So in 1938, that's what he did. In 1941, changed the name to Abraham Lincoln Bookshop. We got our logo from Carl Sandburg. And the first Civil War Roundtable began in our shop. In fact, in the other room over there is the round table that it all began at. I got here in 1971, 53 years ago, and it seems to be a lifetime now. So Lincoln at the Library, artifacts tell their stories. I decided to show many objects instead of going deeper into just a few. So I'm first going to speak about artifacts and their imports, and then show a number of pieces from your library and also that I've handled over the years. Now, artifacts really are man-made objects used for a particular purpose, typically an item of culture or historical interest. They show what the past eras have valued, and they're really a direct channel to a story, material culture, and context. And they bring memory and meaning to life. They're testimonials to the past and actually witnesses to human history and human events. Now, my idea of what constitutes an artifact is a little bit broader than others, perhaps, mainly because I include letters, documents, manuscripts, as well as three-dimensional objects, because in a way they are three-dimensional. And Joan Cashin, in her book, War Matters, which is on Civil War culture and artifacts, she says this: there is a growing understanding that papers, too, are objects, and that it is impossible to divorce the text from the material on which it is inscribed. And I'd also include the ink that does that inscribing. Now, the power of artifacts. Ralph Newman, who began my shop, as I said, we were partners for a little over 13 years until I bought him out in 84. He used to say all the time that he had a direct link to Lincoln. He shook the hand of Paul Engel, who shook the hand of Robert Lincoln, who had shaken, of course, his father's hand, a direct line to Lincoln. But I think that an artifact has an even more immediate line to Mr. Lincoln. I've gone to the Smithsonian. I've actually had the honor to hold the coffee cup that he left as he went out to Ford's Theater. Elizabeth Keckley, the seamstress for Mary, she gathered that up, probably washed the DNA off, unfortunately, but nonetheless, it's still there. I've held the life mask that's also in the Smithsonian that came directly off the mold from Lincoln's face. I've held numerous autographs, and those also are directly to Lincoln. He penned them, he held them. So what's more direct than that? So let's just forget the middlemen and women and goes directly to the artifacts. I thought I'd list a few things that I've learned over the years kind of quickly. I learned about the artifact power when I first came to the shop in 71, and a middle-aged gentleman started coming in who was interested in FDR books. He was African-American, but he could have been anyone. And the second time he came in, I realized he couldn't read, but he was gathering books around him, surrounding himself with FDR, his hero, and their stories. And that's all he needed, to be surrounded by artifacts, in this case, books, that helped him remember FDR. I've secondly learned that you're a real collector when you start thinking about the things you missed and should have purchased instead of what you already have. I've done that a number of times. I've also found that first editions aren't scarce. Every book has a first edition. Second editions are scarce. And again, there are reasons why there's no Millard Fillmore bookshop. Well, it seems obvious to me that if someone purchases something off my shelves, the price is obviously too low. If it's still on my shelf, it's perfectly priced. But I do get a chance to keep the stories from the artifacts I sell, thankfully. Those I don't forget. And artifacts speak to us if we listen. I learn history vertically. I get an artifact of some sort, and I have to find a story, research. I dig down vertically into history where it began to try to figure out what it wants to say to me, what it wants to teach me. So then I can broaden myself out. I've also learned the importance of institutions like libraries, the library you're at today, and collectors. With humanities not being taught in the schools, it's really up to us in the historical world to step in and be the advocate for history with the stories we have. Institutions like this library are steeped in the knowledge of history, and they've got to pass it on to the next generation, which you're doing with exhibits and also programs such as this. Now, I'm sorry to say this, Jesse, but not all artifacts belong in an institution because collectors have a very unique role. They're embedded in their communities, and they're the custodians of physical objects, which they can exhibit at local libraries, schools, historical societies, elk lodges, if they still exist. And being embedded in their communities, they're on the front lines of keeping stories and lessons of the past alive, maybe one artifact at a time, but you're showing something physically to people maybe have never seen anything like that or don't go to museums, or children who for the first time can hold something that takes them back to the past. So I'm now going to go to my share screen here and show you some material that I have now, and also from the library. And here we are. And I want to begin actually just by telling you what you're looking at. This is a portion of a broadside that little Grace Bedell, who was in upstate New York at age 12, and she saw a poster larger than this, and she decided to write to Lincoln. This is in 1860. And she wrote and said, I love the rails around you, but you look a little gaunt. And perhaps you should grow a beard, and the ladies will love it and have their husbands vote for you. Well, he wrote back, don't you think that would be a silly affectation at this point? But he did it. And on his way in the inaugural train, he was actually able to meet her and give her a presidential-elect buss on the cheek. Now, really, the first time, see, here I am. Let's see if I can get to this now. I don't know why it's not going, and it has to. So let's see if I can get, there we are. This was the first artifact that ever really got to me. This is a cuneiform slab that is in the British Museum, and I was there at 18. And this is the Epic of Gilgamesh, which was the Sumerian and Akkadian Noah story, flood story. And I was fascinated by as far back as I could go in writing, and it turned out to be the Sumerians. I stood in front of this thing, I don't know, half hour, marveling at this. It showed me the power of what an artifact can be. Now, the first Lincoln artifact, or related to artifact that I see, was this pitcher, which is a water pitcher, and it depicts Elmer Ellsworth, the first officer to be killed in the war. He went to Arlington with, Alexandria, where there was a hotel that had a secession flag on the top. He ran up the stairs, took it down, and as he was descending the stairs, a man named Jackson, who was proprietor, came around and shot him dead with a blunderbuss. He's actually holding the flag in this. And this picture was the first artifact I really purchased. My wife said to me, what are you going to do with that? So now every time we pass the Chicago History Museum, she knows what I'm going to say. Hey, you know what's inside that building, don't you? So it got me started. Why am I going backwards? I don't know. There we go. Probably the one that I had the longest was this clipped endorsement, where Lincoln, for the only time, misspelled his name. The O and the L got turned around, Lincoln. And then he wrote it again till he got it right. You can see 2 of the 5 different A's he used in his signatures. But that one I used to show everyone, that, especially children and youth, that Abraham Lincoln, author of the Gettysburg Address and the second inaugural and 16th president, he could make mistakes and still go on. And so that's what this was for. Now, if you really want to see what the animal himself, as he would say, looked like, this is it. This is a mold that was taken off. What should I say? The original is in the Smithsonian. From that, a mold was made in the 1880s by Augustus St. Gaudens. And this is the cleaning life mask that came out of that mold. It's better than even the one in the Smithsonian, as far as I'm concerned. And so this is the animal. I've cherished having that when I did. I found a good home for it, I think. So I'm happy and I can visit it. Now, provenance is important especially for objects, but they don't all come with provenance. And that's why an artifact always has to prove itself. If it walks in the shop, well, tell me about yourself. How do I know that you're authentic? Well, this is one of the 3 tables that proved itself because of its line of provenance. It went back all the way to the Secretary of the Navy under Lincoln, Gideon Welles, because his son, Thomas, was at Appomattox when Grant took Lee's surrender. This is the third table in the room. Most people don't know about this third table. This was used by Ellie Parker on Grant's staff, who was a Seneca Indian, but had a beautiful handwriting. And he wrote on this table, transcribed the surrender document that then went over to Grant and Lee, who was sitting at the marble table that's here in the Chicago History Museum. You may know Ellie Parker, that being an Indian, Lee was introduced to him, thought he was black, and took a step back, but then he was told he was a Seneca Indian. He stepped forward, shook his hand, and Lee said, at least there's one true American in the room. But this table had its own provenance, came right down the family. Now, some don't have any provenance except for their, what should I say, their story within the family. And this is one of those that had impeccable provenance, we thought, because it came with a note from, oh no, I'm sorry, I'm thinking about glasses. I got myself off. This one came saying that the family said Booth gave it to one of their ancestors. It's a cravat pin, like a necktie, larger. And this is the pin to hold it together. But who is going to have a coral hand holding a dagger in Victorian times? It's certainly not going to be a Victorian dad or pharmacist or teacher or preacher. What about a thespian who the dagger means everything? If you go to Gramercy Park in New York and into the theater that was Edwin Booth's home, he gave it to the theater as a place to stay and eat and relax for theater people. On the second floor, there's a large case, glass case, with various daggers in it. One for, all from Edwin, the great Shakespearean and John Wilkes Booth's brother. One for Richard II, one for Macbeth, another one for Othello. The Shakespearean, it seems, the dagger, he only uses a dagger for this particular play. So I kind of believe what they say, that this could very well have been, of all people, John Wilkes Booth, but I can't prove it. And therefore I can't put a zero at the end of the price that I'd like to get for it. But it's a beautiful piece. The eyeglasses I was going to talk to you about, there's provenance sometimes from someone really well known. Mary Harlan Lincoln was Robert Lincoln's wife, and she passed down two pairs of eyeglasses with a note from her saying these were from her father-in-law, Abraham. Turned out she was wrong. One of them was, the other one was her own husband's eyeglasses. So even if this perfect provenance, you have to still dig. It may not be correct. Now, of course, others are just outright forgeries. This is a very sad one to me. You can see on Executive Mansion Stationery on May 1st of 65, just a couple of weeks after the assassination, here is John Hay sending an autograph to a woman who asked for it for an album that she had. And what did he send? A carte de visite albumen photograph, the photograph of the Civil War era, which he placed Lincoln's signature upon. This is a forgery of Lincoln's signature. I can't believe it from John Hay because Lincoln had just perished 2 weeks before. What is he doing? There is a signature that he did when he was secretarial. So that I understand and is okay, even though he didn't put SGD in parens before the signature, but that's all in his hand. Be very careful about these sorts of things. Let this man take the oath of December 8th of 1863 and be discharged anywhere from December of 64 till Lincoln's death in April of 65. Could be John Hay instead. Now, dealers take from families all the time. That's what I do. I get something from a family that no longer wants it, and I try to find a new home. What's more unusual is to find something that I can actually bring back to a family. This is Peter Toltevel. Let me see if I can bring this over here, go back and see if I can get this for you. There's Peter Toltevel signing his discharge. And he was in the Marine Band. He started out as a Marine Band in the inauguration of Lincoln. And then he was discharged soon after. Here he is. Then he bought a saloon. Turns out it was right next to Ford's Theater. And John Wilkes Booth purchased his last two drinks, a glass of whiskey and got a glass of water from Peter Toltevel. Strangely enough, I've sold this, and then into my life came a descendant of Peter Toltevel. I couldn't believe it. The man who I sold this to died soon after, actually. I was able to get it back from the family, and now it's back into the Toltevel family. That doesn't happen very often. Kind of fun. Now I'm having trouble going to the next one, huh? Let's see if I can get to this. Now, some artifacts show Lincoln as a 19th century man. He was, and we have to remember that. Here is an example of one way. He met some Cherokee Indians and others in the East Room. This is a French lithograph who they were more interested in Native American at that time. And Lincoln, as you can see, is smaller and not really the center of this. The Indians are. When I first got one of these some years ago, I went and looked for his speech that he gave. He didn't write it down, but there was a newspaper person, journalist, and he wrote down the speech. And it was very interesting. Gave me great insight into Lincoln being that 19th century man. Among the things he said to them is that the reason we whites are prosperous is that we've settled down and farmed. Well, as if the Native Americans cared about prosperity. But then he said, the reason that we white people are less warlike than our red brethren. Well, I guess Lincoln forgot what? The Crusades, the 100 Years' War, the 30 Years' War, the Revolution. I can go on, I know, forever. Back to Nebuchadnezzar, for heaven's sakes. So there he was showing his whiteness over the natives, that he was patronizing, actually. Now, the new discoveries are the things that are maybe most satisfying to me as a dealer. Here was on the right, I've known on the left the carte de visite image, a vignetted image of Lincoln. I didn't know it was vignetted, really, until the oil painting came to me. This is by a man named Weinberg, and he was a Philadelphia photographer. And what he did, he also painted, and he went to the White House, the Executive Mansion, took a photograph of Lincoln, came back, and made this oil, which was an oil from the original photograph, but lost because all we never saw after the assassination, Weinberg put out for commercial purposes the vignetted version, never showing the rest. But look at his hands. That is just spectacular. So this is evidence of a lost photograph. Now, another piece that was a discovery, all of us autograph dealers know that after Andrew Jackson's first term, from his second term on, every land grant was signed by a clerk or a secretary. Jackson had his own adopted son go into the land office and sign land grants for him. Van Buren did the same with his own son. After that, it was just clerks. Stoddard did it for Lincoln. All of a sudden, this came to me. I really couldn't believe it because we all know that no president ever signed a land grant after Jackson. But here is Lincoln. And when is he signing it? Fairly auspicious. January 2nd of 1863, the day after emancipation. And if you can see here, now maybe I don't know if I want to do this again. You can see that he crossed out by and crossed out secretary. I don't know if I can show this. Let me go back again and see if I can show this. You can see secretary is off. The land grant manager, he's there, the recorder, but he would have been signed for by Stoddard, and Stoddard would have put that in. But Lincoln took out secretary, signed it himself. That just blew me away. Now, exciting pieces, I should really tell you why he did that, because Horatio King was a Democrat, and but he thought very much like Lincoln. And in April of '62, he was put on a 3-man commission to help the emancipation law in the District of Columbia and help get it settled and put into place. He rewarded him with this land grant the day after emancipation, because probably King came for New Year's celebrations at the Executive Mansion. And this was given to King's daughter-in-law, some land up in Minnesota. So that's why it even exists. Now, I'm going to show you a few things that were kind of exciting when they came to me. This is unbelievable because it's actually a store card that was at the Wigwam here in Chicago where Lincoln was nominated. And this guy used a card, he probably had it in his pocket, and on the back of it, he put on let's see if I can get this down for you. He put down the results of the nomination process. So in the first ballot, Seward got 173.5, Lincoln 102. He then put down the second as Seward getting 184.5, Lincoln coming up to 181. In the third, Lincoln was put over the top with 254. Interestingly, you see that Seward, Bates, Chase, Cameron, the first 4 with Lincoln, first 5 with Lincoln, were all his cabinet members later on. So he rewarded them, got them in, and probably very much like Lyndon Baines Johnson saying that when he was criticized for people he brought into his cabinet, saying, I'd rather have them inside the tent pissing out than outside pissing in. Maybe that was Lincoln. But nonetheless, this was at the Wigwam, and that was really a real piece of history to come into my hands. Every time I do that, unfortunately, I get stuck. So let me do this, see if I can get back. There we go. So this came to me very early in my career. John Hardin is putting in Captain Abraham Lincoln into his captainship in 1832 in Beardstown. And here he is. And John Hardin, by the way, is the first cousin of Mary Lincoln. On the other side, there is A. Lincoln, captain. For the first time, this is his first elective signature. I had this so early in my career in the 70s, I couldn't afford to keep it. And I sold it now it's in the New York Historical Society. And it still resonates with me because Lincoln said of his election there, of his first elective office, people forget this office when they think about all of his elective offices, that what he said was, of all the successes I've had, this is the one that has given me the most pleasure. So this one has given me the most pleasure having handled it. This is one that I have now that just came to me. I knew one existed, but I didn't know one was out here in the field and marketplace. This is actually a panel bearing a state logo, this time for Delaware, that was part of the funeral car that took Lincoln's coffin from Washington to Springfield. It was a witness to Lincoln's coffin for 20 days. And it was that witness. And it's kind of worn, I think, because here's what the car looked like near the end before it actually burned in an Illinois cornfield. And it looks very much like this, that it was still inside and someone took it out somewhere at this time because the Union Pacific Railroad used the original car that was called the President's car and made for him, but wasn't finished until just when he was assassinated. And so this is a panel of all up on top, ringing the top inside were the 36 states. And the only other one that exists in the Lincoln Heritage Museum in Lincoln, Illinois, is for South Carolina. So all the states were actually there. That's pretty cool to have a witness like that. Now, I thought we would start going into the election year that this is, because Jesse said, let's think about the election year and put things in that are election oriented. Okay. So during the Lincoln election in 1860 for president, there were a few images that were used over and over and over. You probably know this one. This is Cooper Union. He said that his address and this image made him president. Brady took this, of course, and he might be right, but I'll tell you something else that helped in a moment. So the Cooper Union pose, definitely. And this ambrotype of Roderick Cole of Peoria, then in 1858. These are one of a kinds, and anytime you see this image, usually it's going to be reversed. It came from this one. Happen to have this right now. I sold it years and years ago, and now I have it back. You can see that back in 1865, it was refashioned as a memorial with memorial ribbons in the corner and put in this wonderful frame of the time. Really a wonderful piece. But that is the other image you're going to see. And then Samuel Fassett of Chicago. This is October of 59. And it's a salt print, which came after the ambrotypes and just before the albumin photographs of the day. And this is Samuel Fassett. The negative was destroyed in the Chicago fire, but this was ubiquitous as well in the election year of 1860. But I said there's something else helped make him president. It's this: the political debates between Honorable Abraham Lincoln and Honorable Stephen Douglas in the celebrated campaign of 1858 in Illinois. And Follett Foster at the bottom produced this. They sold over 50,000 of these things. This was read by numerous people around the country. And he went out to Cooper Union because of the debates. And when this was decided to be published, Lincoln wanted to do that. He kept a scrapbook, which is in the Smithsonian, the Library of Congress, and a scrapbook to do this. But the publishers said to Lincoln, who's going to want to read this, Mr. Lincoln? Until he was in Cleveland in the 1860s and in giving talks. And a man named Bascom, William Bascom was the secretary of the Ohio Republican Committee. He saw the scrapbook, said, let's do it. He went to his fellow past Whig, Follett, and said, let's have this printed, and they did. So this is what really also helped. And how did he help put them out? He signed them. This is one that's in the library right now. And this was to John Bradford. It's in pencil. 4 of them, Lincoln started out signing them in ink, but the ink bled into the paper, so he went to pencil. Pencil is the correct way. You're probably going to see it. And John Bradford was a bookbinder who moved to Springfield and lived right across the street from Lincoln. And so he got one of these. There are about 43 of them that have been signed. And if you ever want to really know about the publishing history of this, there's a book by my friend David Leroy, also a collector, called Mr. Lincoln's Book, Publishing the Lincoln-Douglas Debates. I helped publish this as well. And it has all a listing of all the signed copies. Bradford is in this, with more information. Bascom got one, and he's in here, and many others, 42 to be exact. 43 come out after this was published. But if you want a really interesting book, Mr. Lincoln's Book by David Leroy will be a wonderful one for you to read about the publishing history of the debates. Now you have, all these campaign biographies came out, and they were the chief marketing tool for all the candidates. But there are about 18 for Mr. Lincoln. In fact, again, another book, if you want to get into the weeds about the campaign biographies for Lincoln, the papers in Illinois history for 1937, a man named Ernest Wesson, has a lengthy chapter in here giving all the history and of each of the campaign biographies for Lincoln. And so all of the ones that we'll see here, there were, as I said, about 18 for Lincoln. This one is probably the smallest, 4 by 3 inches. Didn't get much of a play. Maybe a few hundred copies maybe were made, but they were so small and ephemeral that I think they were just lost. Your library has 2 of them, though. So that's pretty cool. And it's a collector's treasure. I mean, really, it has nothing much to commend it as a biography, but it's except for its rarity. So you can go to the library and hold something pretty rare if you want. Another one that's as rare as Vose is Ichabod Cotting. And he was an Illinois abolitionist. And most of these were destroyed because the Republicans, I think, didn't want Lincoln's. There's a beautiful Lincoln biography in here. And that's why it's on the list of Lincoln biographies. Cotting was ready to deal with politicians whose heart was maybe with the abolitionists, but was not one. But being in an abolitionist tract like this, the Republicans thought that he may be tarnished by being an abolitionist. So I think they tried to get as many as they could, destroy them. I've had this twice, and I only know of 3, maybe 4 that I've ever seen in my 53 years here in the business. Another one that's really pretty scarce I've had, but again, not many have come up, is James Quay Howard. It was unknown until 1901 when a book dealer had some books that came into him, and he gave it to one of his stock boys to go and take out the packing and bring him the books, which the young man did. But he also had part of the packing with it. And the book dealer said, "What is this?" It was this pamphlet. He said, "Oh, that's just the packing. I threw the rest down in the basement." Book dealer told him, "Go to the basement, throw the books down there, and bring up the packing." He found 28 copies of this. And that's how he found this particular one. And again, it's the 3rd most scarce there is. Now, there are composites that also were put together, but only about 3 or 4. This one you have in the library, and I commend you, if you're in the library, to see this particular one, because really it's best for the lithographs that are in there. It's called Portraits and Sketches. Portraits and Sketches of the lives of all the candidates for the presidency and vice presidency for 1860. So Bell, Breckinridge, Everett, Douglas, Lincoln, Hamlin, they're all in here, each with a gorgeous portrait engraved on steel by Buttry. He was one of the finest, I think, as good as any engraver in the Treasury Department, and the only one that I think in the marketplace who rivals him, but in a different form, was John Sartain, who had such a velvety feel to his engravings. So they're 2 different types, but go see Buttry. It's really something. I think you would enjoy seeing them. Here is what they look like. And maybe it's hard to tell on a computer how fine this is, but they have great tonality and clarity when you see it up close. Many songsters came out, of course, and here's one you have in the library that's pretty scarce. You don't see this continental songster come out of Philadelphia. It doesn't have notated music, but includes the tunes you're going to sing for the various songs in there. Honest Abe of the West, Lincoln and Liberty, the Flatboat Excursion, Doug was once a little man, a dig at Douglas. I spurned the bribe, Lincoln, the hope of the nation, and others. These were for club meetings of Republicans, and the Democrats had it and others had it too. But songsters are a wonderful piece, and you can still sing them. There were also sheets of images that came out, really one at a time, but those who had pins would use these. Here's a whole sheet. It's cartavizite size, 2.5 by 4 inches. Taken down small. This is the Hessler photograph. We'll see that in a moment. Here's one done later for the 1864 campaign. And you can see a pin, and they use Cooper Union one in that. These were both albumin photographs that went in here and also ferrotypes. But this is how they came out. And then they were cut for each individual pin. Campaign flags, of course, were big, especially at rallies. And this is one that has Lincoln and Hamlin on it. It has an applique of the title and Lincoln's face on it. And it would run afoul of the law today. In June of 1942, the flag law stopped the defacing. This would be a defacing of the flags. But this is used for the wide awakers especially. But you'd see, and the most important ones, I guess, the ones that collectors really love are the Jugets, meaning you have two images, Lincoln and Hamlin, on ribbons, pins, flags, prints, banners. The Jugets are the one that have the most money attached, I guess, but it's beautiful to have one of these. It's original and takes you right back to the streets when the wide awakers were going. They would have big rallies like this. Here, again, your library has this particular one, 1860 campaign broadside. It was a rally from September 8th of 1860, just a couple of months before the election. This is a banner that I had years ago. It's on cloth. This was found in a barn in Fulton County. And the Fulton County Wide Awakes, the women of Fulton County had an oyster bake, and they raised money to make this for the Wide Awakes. It's large. I don't have it in front of me, but it shows the party platform points: free press, free speech, free labor, and of course, rails. It was a rail candidate after all. So this was a beautiful banner. It needed some work. It was in a barn, but I think it worked out well. So many soldiers couldn't get back to the election. They weren't given time to do that. So you have this in the library. Maybe this is Indiana, but you can see that the regiments is a tally sheet, and Lincoln won 764 to 348 from McClellan. This is 1864. They also had these electoral ballots just for soldiers out in the field. This is from Michigan, and you can see that the soldier crossed out the counties he did not come from and left the one where, and it says on here, just above for the Union, it says, leave the county in which you were enlisted. So this is a particular one. Otherwise, citizens go to the polling place. They have a regular Lincoln and Hamlin or Lincoln and Johnson or whatever ballot, put it into the correct box. Everyone saw you vote. But this was for the photograph, for the soldiers only. Here's a wide awake group in victory for Lincoln. And you can see that the band is in front. Actually, on this particular one, the band names are on there. This is in the Mohawk Valley, and we have the names of all the band members. A big banner like the other one in victory. You can see they have capes, slickers, because they had, and you can see some of them there perhaps, they had oil lamps that they would take in parades at night, and sometimes the oil would fall down on them. So this is a beautiful photograph of that. Of course, the inauguration, and here's a dance card from March 4th of 61, and Hannibal Hamlin is there with it. And on the inside are all the dances, and the women would put whom they danced with. Well, the third one is a waltz and polka. And on the right, she wrote in husband. Second one, I can't make out. But the third one is A. Lincoln. She was in the arms of Abraham Lincoln at the inaugural ball. Lord knows what Mary was thinking when she saw this. But this is the terrific dance card that was at the inauguration. Here is Alexander Hessler. He was really a daguerreotypist and a photographer, began as a portrait artist, actually, but he made something called the tousled hair photograph. This is it. And it was done in February of 1857 in Chicago. And Lincoln came in. Hessler loved weird faces. And no one had a weirder face than Lincoln, as much as I love him, and probably you do too. Hessler allegedly said, Mr. Lincoln, can you do something about your hair? He said, sure. Took his hand through it like that and said, how's that? Hessler said, fine, and took this photo. Mary hated this, but Lincoln didn't mind it because during the campaign of 1858 for senator, anyone wanted a photograph, he said, go to Hessler and he'll get you up one of these. So he didn't mind it. That's the animal again himself. Now it's been used in the library, has many beautiful images of this. Here is a whole plate ivory type that was done in the Hessler studio, we think. It's a hand-colored albumen photograph printed on wax paper and been dry tinted from the reverse. And only a slight tint on the face and the eyes. But it's matted in 56 with the rare plate brass mat. We think it's a rare piece of either Hessler's art or maybe someone who worked for him, because, as I said, he produced oil paintings for his clientele as well. So one of his people could have done this. It's believed that Hessler gave this to Lincoln himself, and that's also believed Lincoln gave this to James Matheny, who was his best man at his wedding. And then it came down allegedly again to, I think it was from Jim Hickey, and then over to your museum. Probably came, I'm not sure how it came from Matheny to him. This is actually another way to use, they use the tousled hair. And this is kind of scarce. This was inside the wigwam. When he was nominated, this showered the delegates from up atop. It was the first mass-produced image of Lincoln, printed just for the wigwam when he was nominated. It was also given out outside. And then later, this one, you can see fourth edition at the bottom, was produced a little later, but still within the campaign period, cleaned up a little bit. You know, let's see, if we go back, this is more to type to the tousled hair. This a little bit less. Also, his face and was cleaned up to make him look a little younger. But this was done by E.H. Brown in Chicago, known as the Wigwam print. Also, this medal, also a little bit cleaned up. Freedom National Medal is in your museum, a 26mm bronze for the 1860 campaign. And again, shows that same image that we're looking at. At the reverse, it says Freedom National, Slavery Sectional. Now, the Republicans were like Mary. They couldn't stand that, and they needed a cleaned up version of Lincoln in 1860 campaign. So he went down to Springfield with his three kids and Charles Merck, who was an oil painter for him. We'll get to that. And he made this he made 4 photographs. 2 of them are well known. And this was used also during the campaign. We saw the little CDV-sized albumen with numerous photographs showing this particular one, in fact. And so this was made in 1860. It became, 1880 by George Ayers, who took over Hessler's studio. And Nicolay and Hay in the 1880s put out their 10-volume biography of Lincoln, and they needed a frontispiece. They wanted a clean-shaven frontispiece. They went to Ayers. He gave them this. They did it, became an overnight sensation, and people bought this in droves. Still, it can be found. Look, if you want to collect one, wait till you have a really nice one with that's clean and clear. Now, Charles Merck, working for Hessler, went down with the express reason to make an oil painting as well, because they wanted to put one up in Hessler's studio gallery. Brady did that. Brady had a wall of the famous. People walked in and said, "Oh my gosh, all these people took Brady, got a photograph by Brady. I guess I'll sit in the chair and get one too." And Hessler was doing the same thing. And this was made, and he gave it, it was sold at a sanitary fair here in Chicago, and went through a number of places until it came to me. And I've had this since the early 90s, and is just gorgeous in the flesh. Not bad this way either. I think the finest that was produced of the beardless from life, because Merck was there, saw him, remember, took that picture and used it, but he'd already seen him, took his notes on the eye color and tonality of the skin, and produced this spectacular oil. Here he is, Charles Merck, Chicago, June of 60, July of 60. Well, I've had some wonderful pieces, and I think we're almost out of our time, and I'd like to have questions. Just to show you, here is the original carte de visite image that identified Booth at the Garrett farm where he was shot and died. This was the original. Conger was told to go down by Stanton's right-hand thug, Baker. Conger, go down, find these guys, and arrest them. Well, this is the one who identified Booth. Here actually was the original order to carry out the hanging of the Lincoln assassins, done up by Edie Townsend, who was the Assistant Adjutant General of the Army. He signs this, and this was on the scaffold, read to the prisoners before they were hanged. Pretty cool to handle that piece. And then just in closing here with the presentation, here is like a comic in a way, of Kate Greenaway, that was owned by Abraham Jack Lincoln, Abraham and Mary's grandson. Abraham never saw him. He was assassinated. But Mary, this is Robert's son. And here he is, A. Lincoln, but later he started to forge his grandfather's signature. And here is a good example of that. He's getting close now. This is not too bad, if you didn't know. And I don't want anyone to die, especially someone young. He died at age 17. But if he had lived, oh my Lord, the number of autographs that would have come out in his hand, it scares the hell out of me, frankly, to tell you the truth. So I'm going to stop the share, and then I want to just close and say that history lengthens lives. Your life, my life, knowledge of history, getting embedded into history, because we inculcate all the years that we have studied. For instance, Lincoln, going back to his birth in 1809, I know all of him and past up till today. And so I feel today 215 years old. I've added years, not my own, to my years. And I now feel myself 215 years old. My next bookshop is going to be the Moses Bookshop, so I can then feel 3,000 years old. Thank you. I've enjoyed sharing what I could today with you. And I think, Jesse, you may have questions from our audience.
Absolutely. First, I'd like to say thank you so much, Daniel, for sharing about some of the truly wonderful items that have come through your bookshop, as well as some here at the Allen County Public Library in our Lincoln Financial Foundation collection. Now I invite our audience to enter any questions you might have into the Q&A, but I'd like to get started by asking you, Daniel, to share about your Facebook live stream programming at the Abraham Lincoln Bookshop.
Well, thank you. Yes, in 2005, we began to interview authors live. I'm actually in, now we have a broadcast studio here. I have two big cameras in front of me as well and a TriCaster. So we've interviewed authors and their new books as they come out. Doris Kearns Goodwin, Harold Holzer, John Meacham, Wesley Clark back in the day. All sorts of people have come in here, and we've talked about that for an hour. And people, while we're live, can ask questions, leave comments, or watch it on YouTube afterward. And also, they can purchase a first edition signed book or 7 off our website. So I urge you to go to alincolnbookshop.com. That's our website. It looks like a museum. You're going to see things like I've just been showing you, and you might enjoy just going through those. Go and leave your email under contact us. Go to the contact and leave your email if you'd like to know what authors are coming up. We have one coming up on the 10th of May. We're going to have Eric Larson here. Unfortunately, we're not going to have him for an interview, just to come in and sign books directly. He has a new book that is out just on the 30th. It came out just a couple of days ago, and it's called The Demon of Unrest, a saga of hubris, heartbreak, and heroism at the dawn of the Civil War. It's those months from Lincoln's election to the firing and taking of Fort Sumter. So it's really Charleston Harbor. Huge amount of interesting people in here. Eric Larson, as you know, from the Devil in White City, can write. And this is a wonderful book. If you want, you can get one signed directly. Other books that we have, we do with book plates because of what COVID was. Many of them are done by Zoom now. There's our logo that came from Carl Sandburg. But if you like the Larson book, please feel free to stop by and do that. We also have an artifact show that started in March of 2020, right, with COVID, because we have the broadcast studio, and we have 15, 20-minute artifact shows called Take a Break with History that talks about a specific artifact or 3 that come through the shop. So we hope to see all of you on our website. Thank you.
That sounds like some really robust programming with some great authors. What a great programming you've got going on there.
We've been lucky.
But I'd like to ask our first audience question. Do you ever come across items associated with the Hanks family?
Not very often. If I can get an autograph of Tom Hanks, I've associated with the Hanks family, which he's finally acknowledging. He never wanted to be part of it. But they just don't come by. No, it's very difficult. Aidan Baber wrote later about the Hanks families in some genealogical works, and you have all of those, the Aidan Baber books in your library. They are a bit compromised. They're not exactly all correct, but there's a lot in there if you want to learn more about the Hanks and whom they were. But artifacts, not really.
Sure. Well, we've got the next one here. What is the most expensive artifact you've ever owned or sold?
Wow. Well, I guess it would have been a letter of Lincoln. I sold, others have sold things for more, but for me, I sold something, and collections have gone more, but an individual item, 675,000 was a letter of Lincoln to Thomas Corwin. Harold Holzer on his secession book came out just before I found it. And in the second edition, he got it into the introduction. And Thomas Corwin, had Lincoln come into Ohio to give talks. And that's where I showed you how the publication of the debate started on that talk when he went into Columbus and Cincinnati. So Corwin, who had been governor, was asking him about the campaign in Illinois, and Lincoln in this talked about how the Fugitive Slave Law Act was constitutional. He can't do anything about it, but bad policy. He uses the word idiotic for the only time in any of his writings. It's idiotic to think that the people coming from the Whigs and the Democrats into the newly formed Republican Party would not stay with the Republican Party over the slavery issue. Idiotic to think otherwise.
Absolutely. So how would you authenticate a newsprint of the assassination?
A newsprint. You
A
mean?
newspaper. We've seen lots of authentic, but also later forgeries of assassination edition newspapers. So how would you go about authenticating one of those?
Well, most of the newspapers are authentic. Rag paper, first of all, make sure it's rag and not pulp, which came in 1871, and everything changed. So there's a real feel to pulp, especially of the late 1870s and 80s. You'll feel the difference, even sounds different, the rustle of it than rag. There's that very famous New York Herald newspaper with an image of Lincoln on the front. That is false. There was never an assassination newspaper with Lincoln image on it. 2:10 a.m. extra, it says. That's false. There was no 2:10 a.m. extra. Most of the others are going to be okay, though. But that's the one to really stay away from.
That's fascinating. Thank you so much for that.
Mm.
Next up, we've got, what is your favorite photograph of Lincoln?
Oh, gosh, I wish I had it here. I love Marsh. I love, oh my gosh, the neuron isn't going off. There's one in which he's scowling like this, and he looks as if, oh my God, you wouldn't want to meet this guy in a law court or in a back alley. But certainly I love the one we just saw, the tousled hair, because that's who he was. The other is von Schneidau. Polycarpus von Schneidau here in Chicago took a photograph of him holding really an abolitionist newspaper. And the von Schneidau, why I love that, not only because he has that, and then it was used in 1858 by the Chicago Press and Tribune, Medill, the publisher, was able to Photoshop in his Press and Tribune onto that to show he was onto the photograph, showing that he was supporting Lincoln as a senatorial candidate. But the other thing about that, no, I'm sorry, I'm thinking of a different one. So that really is a favorite of mine. It was done here on Lake Street in Chicago.
I have to say the tousled hair one is also one of my favorites. So would you tell us about how you got into the Lincolniana trade and what particularly sparked your interest in Lincoln?
Coming here. I mean, first of all, I was born and raised in Chicago, so it's in my DNA. And anyone here in Illinois, it's in your DNA. You go down in 8th grade to Springfield, for heaven's sakes. Your parents take you when you're 6 to parade you around. In those days, you could walk right into the home, didn't have to worry about tours, parked right next to the home. Anyway, so I was in the middle of my doctorate at NYU. And 68, 69, 70, 71. And I didn't really like what I was seeing in graduate school. And I was working at a bookshop, the late great Paperback City, and I enjoyed what I was doing. People would come in and say, Dan, I loved what you sold me last time. Find me something else. I love that process. And I was getting to age 27. What are you going to do in life? My parents were saying I was in the middle of history. I said, oh, I'm going to open up a history shop. Ha, ha, ha. And then I found a history shop. I came back to Chicago to visit my parents, and I was thinking of the book business. And a friend of my parents brought me here to Ralph Newman to talk to just about the book biz, but he was looking for someone to eventually take it over, and it was a marriage. And I purchased every other book. We became partners for 13 and a half years, and I bought him out. Really, I was more interested in Gilgamesh, the Sumerian flood story, and the times back then in Babylonia than I was in American history. But here I found myself immersed in it and had to learn pretty quickly. Ralph said it took him, because he had no one to help him, 12 years to get used to feeling comfortable. It took me about 10 years in here, because you not only have to learn the history, you have to learn about every single object and where it fits in. And I'm still learning, because there's something new that comes up that needs research. That's the fun part of this, something new that I'm able to present and do the research for and leave my mark that way.
Absolutely. So you did us the honor of appraising the Lincoln Financial Foundation collection when it was deeded to the state of Indiana in 2009. So what are some of the most memorable items that still stick with you today that you remember from back then?
Well, the family album, of course, was given while I was there, and came through Robert Todd Lincoln Beckwith to Jim Hickey, and he got it, the family album in there. I think that's probably the one that sticks out the most. I mean, there's so many. You have so many things. I've shown some of them today, and some of the prints that you don't see, certainly the wigwam print that we showed today. Those are the ones that stick in my mind, I guess, the most. But it's really the totality. That's what sticks in my mind. You have so much. When I went through the appraisal, and the state of Indiana got the foundation's collection, they did something that what they didn't care about before that. They needed an appraisal of every single object. So I went in there, and every single carte de visite, you have a few. I had to go through every single one and put a price on it. I saw every single piece that's in there. And that's really that was the honor and blessing that I've had since then. The foundation really has been my touchstone all my 53 years, because it's been the most active for all those years. And that's what really gets to me. You have one of the most active collections that I know of.
It truly is a remarkable collection, and I am honored to get to work with it. Absolutely.
Positively.
So you've had a remarkable career as one of the nation's top experts in Lincolniana. Where do you think the field is going? Like new trends in scholarship or interpretation?
Well, you remember back in the 40s, James Randall, the historian, put out a pamphlet, about, is there anything more to learn about Lincoln? Well, new books come out, tens and tens of them come out every single year. So I guess there's a new way to look at things every time. Most recently, of course, scholars, maybe it's journalism that is most interesting today. Journalists are coming into the historical world. Steve Inskeep, Avalon from CNN, Noah, I forget his name now, and others, even Eric Larson, who have come in, not trained as historians. I don't think Larson was, but through journalism and writing, they know research, and they write well, and they pick areas. Ed Acorn is another one, the wigwam here in Chicago. He was amazed that no one, after all these years, a few years ago, he took on a minute book on the wigwam here in Chicago and came up with things that we had never really heard before, because we all knew what happened. We know the overall arching history, but he got into the minutia of it, and that's what happens. And same thing with this, I think, even though we have Weinberg's book on the Fort Sumter campaign from back in the 60s, First Blood, but this really has so many characters we haven't really gotten into enough, and who had their moment in Charleston Harbor during that time that began the war. And he has a few things to say, Larson, that I'm not sure I agree with, but it's kind of interesting to be able to have that conversation. So that, I think that's where it's kind of going. We're having more citizen historians come in, and I don't think that's bad.
That's something I've definitely noticed as well. Different fields besides just historians are adding perspectives on the scholarship as well. So as we wrap up here, I've got one final question for you. Now, I imagine you as a voracious reader. I don't think that's too far of a stretch to say. So do you have any favorite or new Lincolniana works you have to recommend to us? I know you mentioned a couple so far today, but is there any particular you'd like to speak about?
Well, if you want a one volume, first of all, I'm going to say this: the concise Lincoln history out of SIU Press, Southern Illinois University Press, 28 volumes, concise. They're about 130 pages. Some do have footnotes or notes, others don't, but it has no time to get into the weeds. It just tells a story by people who know the story well, and they tell it well. So it's great for younger readers or people who don't wish to read a larger book and just get in, know, learn something and continue. Those 28 volumes can be terrific on anyone's shelf to help you learn and help younger people learn. Ron White's A. Lincoln, I think, is a terrific one volume. And I'd say it's the top one volume if you want to read the best one out today. I can't say that I don't love Ben Thomas from early 1950s, 52, 53. It's a beautiful story that he tells. It's not completely up to date in scholarship because it was the early 1950s, but that's a beautiful one to read. And so I think the concise series, those two books on one volumes, then of course you can go to others. Blumenthal is writing, Sidney Blumenthal is 5 volumes, is out, 3 are out, just on Lincoln as a politician. Great stuff. And then you get into the minutiae, as I've just said, the wigwam, Charleston Harbor. There are so many little things to get into as well. Those are the ones I love best. As a book, there are 2 of them that I love the most. One is Autographed Leaves of Our Country's Authors. You have one. That's where the last 2 copies in Lincoln's hand of the Gettysburg Address come from. A sanitary fair in Baltimore in 1864 published autographed leaves, original manuscripts, facsimiles of Emerson, Thoreau, Harriet Beecher Stowe, Francis Scott Key, and Abraham Lincoln. And the last one that he wrote out is in there. That's my favorite book out of the Civil War. My favorite book out of the 20th century by George Stevens called Lincoln's Doctor's Dog and Other Bestsellers. He wanted to write a book on bestsellers. It's a thin little book, and he wanted to write about bestsellers, but he said only books about dogs, and books about Lincoln, and books about doctors sell. Lincoln's Doctor's Dog was the title of that. I have one with a dust jacket. I'm so proud.
That's great. You mentioned a couple of my favorites as well. I can heartily recommend, and thanks for giving our audience and myself some further reading suggestions. With that, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us today, Daniel, and to our audience as well for your time. With that,
Appreciate it. Thank you.
absolutely. Have a great afternoon, everyone.